Hello, and welcome to Casual Krakoa. I'm Dave Busing, founder and editor-in-chief of comicbookherald.com. Thanks, everybody, for hopping in here at the start of what should be an exciting conversation about all the X-Men comics today. If there was news this week, if anything happened that you guys thought was interesting, definitely let me know in the comments. Super Chat is open if you definitely want to get your questions and thoughts available here on the stream. But again, if there is anything newsworthy or noteworthy, please contribute here in the comments. I would love to hear about it. In the meantime, we're going to talk about comics. And probably we'll have to talk about this thing that happened with the interview of Jonathan Hickman. I guess we can talk about it. We could talk about the interview that Jonathan Hickman gave in Entertainment Weekly, a very good interview conducted by Christian Holub, comic book journalist, in which he declared it is the end, for now, of Hickman on X-Men. A number of people have been asking right here on the Casual Krakoa stream. I've been seeing in the chat today people asking, Dave, are you okay? Things like, one of my first thoughts was, I think Dave's not all right. What's going on? Are you going to make it? I saw someone say that titling this video, Why Hickman Isn't Really Leaving X-Men, was akin to still saying Bernie still might make it. Bernie still might be the nominee, which is a good analogy. Fair. But here's the thing. We're going to talk about the news that came out yesterday about like Hickman leaving the X-Men. Okay, this conversation that people have been having in the X-Men universe and in comics fandom for a good long while. And then truly, I'm going to say why I think Hickman isn't really leaving X-Men comics. All right, now before we get too deep into the weeds, I want to say that I'm not denying the existence of this interview I have on the screen next to me. Okay, I'm not going to pretend this information was not divulged. I am not going to ignore what came out yesterday, which is a bummer, honestly, because the news, for those of you who haven't read the article itself, who've maybe just been catching wind of this through socials or whatnot, or even just, saw some people like, hey, I walked into my comic shop today and they're like, yeah, Hickman's off X-Men, and that's the first time hearing it, right? Like, if you're not living on Twitter, first off, good for you. Second off, this stuff isn't as prevalent for others who aren't living in that world all the time. The general gist of the story of the news was Hickman's After Inferno, the 4-issue oversized X-Men event, which sounds like, based on the way everyone's talking about this, that's going to kick off Act 2 of this 3-act general structure that Hickman came in with his vision for X-Men, right? Act 1 was House of X and Powers of 10, and then the Dawn of X and the Reign of X that we've been living in, right? That the comics are playing in, right? Those are the stories that we're getting right now. That's Act 1, actually. Act 2 seems like it will be instigated by Inferno, the series that Hickman's writing right now, this event-sized thing that's going to follow up on a lot of the threads, a lot of the big picture ideas that came in House and Powers. I'm extremely excited for it still, right? Inferno is going to be very, very interesting. It sounds like that will then kickstart in January a weekly X-Men comic series that will then launch into a bunch of new books, right? So, or maybe not new books, but some sort of reset, some sort of relaunch. Maybe it's not going to be every title gets canceled and we get all new titles, but definitely there's going to be some sort of reconfiguration, which I think is good, right? It's going to be good to go into 2022 with sort of a refreshed line. I think that will be exciting, and I think the line is definitely due for that. We had some books coming out today, for example, like Marauders number 23. And I guess X-Corp number 4 is the other one I'm thinking of, but like Marauders in particular, the books that launched as Dawn of X Wave 1 launches, Marauders, Excalibur, those are like in the 20s now in terms of issue count, right? And I think for the most part, all of those are kind of middling at this point. X-Force among them, and New Mutants, which basically already had a reset because it had a total creative overhaul with Vita Ayala and Rod Reyes. So anyway, that's happening. Hickman's out after Inferno. He said, I'm not going to be writing any ongoing X-Men comics. I'm going to talk today about what that means, about the information, about reading some of the tea leaves, reading in between the lines in this interview, and talking about why I think this means Hickman isn't really leaving X-Men comics. But I mean, first up, let's actually face facts and not be totally just pretending this thing didn't happen. I mean, I've got some crow to eat. Absolutely. I've been saying for months that I did not think this would happen. I believed it. I really did not think that Hickman would be stepping away from the X office as the head of X for what sounds like it will be a substantial period of time. right? So, and I think there's some key things here where it's like, okay, he's leaving X-Men, he's leaving as the head of X. He's not leaving Marvel, okay? It's not the actual feared sort of worst case scenario for fans of the writer, right? For those of us who are invested in the vision and invested in him contributing to Marvel Comics. Because here's the thing, I enjoy Marvel Comics more when Jonathan Hickman's involved. I just do. But for those of us who are worried about that, like, oh, he's got a Substack deal now. He's going to be doing 3 Worlds, 3 Moons all the time. That's not the case. He's still going to be doing Marvel stuff. So that leaves the door open, and that leaves the door open for me to zag when everyone is zigging here and say, here's the thing, like, he's leaving X-Men. That's not an interesting conversation. That's kind of boring. So I'm going to talk about why he isn't really leaving X-Men comics and what I mean by that. But definitely my first reaction is, all right, I got some crow to eat. I was wrong. I was wrong. He is apparently content to step away from like X-Men comics for a period of time, you know? And I didn't think that would be the case given the vision that we see in House and Powers, given what hopefully is to come in Inferno. I definitely believed that there would be more of a commitment to sticking around, to like seeing some of that through, right? To being sort of the vision at the head of the line, even if he takes breaks, even if he takes sabbaticals, stepping in with a Moira series, stepping in with a new X-Men starring the Araco Mutants, right? All these things that I've talked about, things that I really want to see. You know, his time with X-Men in a super involved capacity is over. And that's a bummer. And I was definitely wrong. So totally admitting that. I mean, I think too, like, first reactions to this are like definitely spending some of yesterday in kind of a malaise, you know, a bit of a funk, which is like big picture in terms of things that matter in the world. You know, this is not super high among them, but definitely I was bummed. I was like, I don't want this for X-Men comics. I'm less interested in the Krakoa era and in the X-Men experience without a visionary writer that I quite enjoy, who wrote House and Powers and roped so many people back into this without them at the helm. Which, truthfully, I am. I think all good stories should end, right? I was prepared for that. The real bummer of this announcement, though, is the feeling that, you know, Hickman is bowing out in the middle. You know what I mean, right? Like that he set up the playground, said, "Here it is, everybody have at it. I'm out." That's the bummer, I think, potentially. And, you know, this is an obvious statement, but, like, I really like Jonathan Hickman written comics, okay? And honestly, even the ones I don't vibe with, I'm consistently engaged and invested in the approach. For example, I just reread the first 7 issues of Decorum, the 8-issue Image series with genuinely genre-exploding art by Mike Huddleston, and it's about 4 parts interesting for every 1 part good story. But nonetheless, I enjoyed the hell out of it, and enjoyed the experience out of trying to decipher the craft and the intent, and even the, like, just the what the hell is actually happening here of it all. You know, like, there's a lot to it that I really enjoy. And just that feeling too, like, I need to research, you know, like the singularity for idiots in order to further engage with the science fiction at play. Just as I enjoy following up on like John Galati, a CBH writer and friend, his recommendation that I need to read Neil Stephenson's Snow Crash to identify parallels between these works. Like, I don't engage with too many other comics in ways where it's both like learning experience and distraction and entertainment. And I love that. I love that for Decorum. There's interesting stuff there. I don't think it's amazing, but that was coming into X books, and that was big for me. That definitely helped me engage with them in a significantly more involved fashion, you know? So if the news, I think, from this interview was a clear, Hickman's not going to write an ongoing X book after Inferno, but he'll come back for the Act 3 event, I'm a little bummed, but generally still okay with that, right? Instead, it's not that specific. Instead, it's more just like he's leaving for now. He's going to go do other Marvel stuff. There's no clear, oh, and he'll come back. And when I talk about the Act 3 thing, you know, look at this quote here from the interview. The initial pitch was what Hickman describes as very big, very broad, 3-act, 3-event narrative, the first of which was House of X, okay? And Inferno seems to be setting up stage 2. So the implication here is that Act 3, the big endgame, the big finale, that like Hickman has a vision there, he has thoughts, and presumably, unless Inferno taps into this in ways that I fully don't expect, I think presumably Act 3 was going to be like heavily phalanx related, okay? Like I definitely expected it to be very much related to the phalanx, very much related to galactic intelligences, all that really hard sci-fi stuff that was set up in Powers of 10, which we have not touched at all, okay, right? Like we have not touched that at all. That's probably the stuff I was most excited about from Jump that now seems the most in doubt. And that I would say is the piece that is like the most worrisome to me as a fan of this, that those concepts and those ideas, those ones are a lot more difficult, I think, to put in the hands of another creator. Not to say other creators couldn't play with that and have ideas and have vision, right? Like we got Al Ewing involved in the line right now. There's a creator who gets cosmic stuff, right? Like he's writing Marvel's cosmic line. Couldn't he do interesting failing stuff? Absolutely. I think the downside to that is those ideas were seeded, but they're just seeds right now, right? Like this stuff is just very limited in terms of the actual data that we have here, in front of us. I'm trying to find these data pages that I have. I thought I had saved. Maybe I didn't. Never mind. But regardless, like actually looking at Hickman's societal galactic intelligences and what the heck a Dominion is, like that stuff seems like things that Hickman's voice would have been best for. And that's the piece that I'm most worried about losing. Okay. And that's why I can't fully let go. It's a little desperate. It's a little pitiful. And you can take the little out of that. It's both of those things. But nonetheless, I still definitely want to talk about why I think Hickman isn't really leaving X-Men and kind of what that means. Okay. Now let's look at, before I get into the full conversation there. Again, first off, thanks for those of you who are joining live. You can get your questions in here in the chat. All I ask is that you be respectful, be polite to those around you. The super chat is open. I'm going to get to one of these that just came in a second ago. Thanks so much for the contribution and for the support of Comic Book Herald in the channel here. I do want to mention too, I did an actual Crack and Krakoa video today. First Crack and Krakoa video since, I don't know, July probably? No, June. And I did it on Trial Magneto, okay? Did a Trial Magneto, Crack and Krakoa proper video. Trial Magneto is real fun. I enjoyed Trial Magneto a lot. I had a great time reading this Lee Williams and Lucas Wernick comic. I'm not going to talk about it in tremendous detail here because, again, I have a proper Crack and Krakoa video. If you're interested in engaging with that, you can find it on the Comic Book Herald channel. Please subscribe, check out the playlists, and you can check it out there for my full thoughts on what's going on in Trial Magneto. But I will just suffice to say here, it's really good. I like this comic a lot, okay? So let's dig into the losing Hickman at the center of the X-Men line, what that means, and whether or not this is a sky is falling moment for X-Men comics. Because again, like I'm of the mindset that this was a big deal. Having a voice like Jonathan Hickman come back to write X-Men, clearly, right? It inspired House of X and Powers Down, inspired so many new readers into this line. I think too, like there's some conversation right now around, Hickman writing an ongoing X-Men series wasn't actually that critical to the Dawn of X, right? Like how much of the Dawn of X was actually reliant on Hickman's X-Men? I think even as the wave launched, a lot of it was like Marauders was really exciting at the start of this. But like the most exciting books right now are some of the more recent ones that have launched, Sword and Hellions, for example, right? The rebooted sort of creative launch of New Mutants, right? These are exciting things. Hickman's X-Men, though, I think the thing that it offered, even if you weren't into the quality of those comics nearly as much in Powers and House, and I think there's really no question to my mind that Hickman's X-Men run, the 21 issues, it's definitely nowhere as good as House and Powers, right? And I think even compare it to other Marvel runs that Hickman has written. I think books like Secret Warriors, Fantastic Four, I think, what else has he done? Avengers, New Avengers, right? Like it's probably more on the wavelength of Avengers in that it's big, it's connecting to a lot of ideas, but it's pretty messy. And it like Hickman's Avengers run gets talked about in very high terms, and I think of his Avengers run being very good. But often what I'm talking about when I talk about Hickman's Avengers is specifically the series New Avengers. New Avengers I like reading a lot, dealing with the Illuminati, dealing with the whole focus of the actual multiversal collapse, building to Secret Wars. Hickman's Avengers series, running concurrent to that, is a lot messier. There's a lot more stuff in there that does not work nearly as well. I think his X-Men run is more on par with that, which again is to say, like, it's not his best work. I still like a lot of it. I think when we look at, like, it not being that good, what you're overlooking in stating that, like maybe if you're like, oh, it wasn't a book that I really dug that much anyway, who cares? It connected to the vision. It held the vision together in a way that I think was absolutely essential, And I think this is something that's going to need to change post-Inferno, is the rest of the comics now should be free to connect to that vision. There was sort of a sense, I think, in Dawn of X where it was like other books can't really fully get into the vision and these ideas because that's kind of Hickman's territory and that's Hickman's stuff to play with. And I think what's going to happen taking him off the books is maybe you free some of those shackles, maybe you free some of those chains where now people can go fully into like, okay, this is my world to build now. Like Jerry Duggan, Pepe Larraz, this is my X-Men team to build now. I get to define what Act 2 is, right? Like Hickman has given us the outlines, he has given us the vision of where we're going, but this is ours to actually write. So now it's going to be up to them to see if they can pull that off or not. And my optimism is much greater for some creators than others. You know, truth be told, like I tweeted about this earlier, but there's a top tier of X creators that I think is very good. And it's one of the things that sort of gets lost in the shuffle of, oh, I can't believe Hickman's off this. Like, I don't even want to read this anymore. If that's your attitude, one of the things that gets lost there is when has a creator come in and built a stable, a creative presence, a creative office the way that Hickman did here with X-Men, right? And I guess you give credit. I don't know where the credit is dispersed here, but you got Jordan D. White editing. You got assistant editors here. You got just the creators themselves, like saying, "Hey, we want to be a part of this." But creating a stable of writers where you have Al Ewing, you have Cy Spurrier, you have Zeb Wells, you have Lee Williams writing a great Trial of Magneto today. You have Vita Ayala writing a very good New Mutants. You have Pepe Larraz, you have Josh Cassara, you have Ariana Maher doing incredible lettering. You have Guru FX with Cassara on colors, right? You have a stable of really talented core creators. Like, offices across Marvel don't do that. It doesn't happen where there's like a subdivision of Marvel Comics that just has really, really incredible talent, all sort of firing on all cylinders in the way that these are, okay? Like, seriously, look throughout Marvel history. Like, when have the team lines, you know, because it's not going to be an individual character, when have the team lines had creative sort of synergy like this? You know, look across X-Men, look across Avengers, look across Fantastic Four. When has this happened? It doesn't hardly ever happen. Look across Spider books, right? Like, this is super rare. You could think about maybe the Spider-Man Brain Trust, you know, in the Brand New Day era. You could think about on a more limited scale, 80s X-Men with Claremont, the Simonsons, and the Senti, right? That sort of stuff. But like, on this scale, X-Men's kind of doing it differently. And even if the books aren't always knockouts, like, that's exciting that they're all connected, they're all talking, they're all planning together, and seemingly kind of on the same page. Because if you look at other eras where you just have a lot of really great creators of Marvel, for example, circa Marvel Now, right? Like, you have a lot of great creators, but they're all doing their own thing. They're all creating their own siloed universes. You have a Hickman verse, you have a Remender verse, you have a Bendis verse. They're all doing their own thing, right? And I really like the idea now of them playing together and building towards something great. That's important. And I think Hickman gets, I don't know what percentage of credit, but he gets some credit for setting that up and for sort of recognizing that that is what they have now, right? I don't know that a lot of creators would like not just want to take all the credit for themselves. You know, there's a sort of vibe here, and I don't know that I'm going to go on the degree of like sacrificial selflessness, but there's a certain attitude here of, hey, I set this thing up, I set it up so other creators could thrive, let them thrive. They're enjoying playing in the Krakoa era, Marvel thinks it's selling well enough to continue doing that, fine, go ahead. I won't go forward with my vision stuff, I won't go forward with my big sort of tentpole events until they're done with it. And that is like, that's rare. Not a lot of creators would do that. I think maybe Hickman's in a point in his career where he doesn't need it. Dude's elevated to a status where I'm talking about him here on a YouTube stream. You're thinking about him when you go home. Like, dude is one of the biggest names in comics. That's interesting to me. That he might look at this and say, I don't need this. I don't need to write the incredible 3-act X-Men event, at least on the timeline that I thought I did, because it lets other people thrive. That is unique in comics. I don't think there are many comparable examples. All right, so let's look at some questions before I really start filling out why I think Hickman isn't really leaving X-Men. Okay, question here, number 1 from the Super Chat. Who do you think should replace Hickman as head of X in a way that doesn't end Krakoa so soon and really explores the potential of histories that this scenario can offer? Okay, I think a lot of conversation has been had right now about the replacement of head of X, and I think for a long time, for a number of months now, people have been saying, oh, it's Jerry Duggan is the heir to the throne because he's the one who's writing X-Men. I don't think Jerry Duggan can be considered the head of X. Not because I have insight into how the X office is functioning, but because he's not the superstar talent in the group of writers, clearly an essential component, right? Clearly essential. But Jerry Duggan is a glue guy. If you're looking at like a sports team construction, glue guy, right? Solid player. You need him in the lineup. Your team is better for having that presence, kind of like a grizzled old vet. X-Men, I think, has the potential to be great, but has the potential to be great because he's letting Pepe Larraz shine, And I think unless X-Men really takes off and escalates, and we're like, oh wow, okay, didn't know Duggan had this in him. This is an amazing run. There's nothing in the catalog here that suggests Jerry Duggan should be ascending to head of X. I think if he's the head of X, I think it's a disappointing line. I think you do have creators though who are much better suited for that level of focus, an Al Ewing, a Zeb Wells, but you have issues with all of these creators. Al Ewing's the head of Marvel Cosmic. Zeb Wells is the head of Spider-Man committee to come, right, with all the Spider-Man Beyond stuff. Cy Spurrier, I don't know. Leah Williams, Vita Ayala, they don't have the resume. They don't have the catalog. I think it's going to be more a head of X by committee. That is a very unique role, and I'll kind of talk about this when I talk about why Hickman isn't leaving X-Men, but you don't have individual creator heads of departments in comics. That's not a typical role. Head of X is a concept and as an idea. That's a Hickman thing that started with House and Powers. That's not a role that creators play, necessarily, at least in that way. So again, that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about, how unique this is. It just doesn't need to be it. And I think the Duggan thing too, I'm harsher probably on him as a creator than many people are really excited about X-Men. And I think that's great. Good, be excited about X-Men, the comic series. But I think when you look at Duggan's long-running series, look at I guess Cable ended, but look at Marauders. I mean, issue number 23 came out today. Spinning your wheels. Marauders is spinning its wheels. Marauders has lost so much of the freshness and the energy that it had at the start. That's not a title that has sustained itself super well. So when I talk about sort of having lacking confidence in Duggan as somebody who can drive the line, it's because I haven't seen it. I haven't seen it done, and I need to see it first before I buy into that idea. Okay, we got another question here. This one I believe is from Matt Draper, great YouTube channel. Check out Matt Draper, highly recommended. Now that Hickman has freed himself of those, I'm not going to say that, dirty phrase. What do you think he's writing at Marvel? Now that he's free of the mutants, what do you think he's writing at Marvel? I'd like Doctor Strange. Okay, I'm going to get to this. So actually, let me stop delaying and let's just get to it. Okay, because I'm going to answer the question here. Why Hickman isn't leaving the X-Men? In addition to the fact that I think it's more fun to double down on something I was clearly wrong about. Why isn't Hickman leaving the X-Men? This isn't the crux of my argument, but let's start here. It's worth saying up front that Hickman's ideas and vision through House and Powers and soon through Inferno will clearly shape X-Men comics for literal years. Okay? This is going to happen. This has already happened. So yes, in that slightly more abstract way, Hickman doesn't leave X-Men just because he's not writing an ongoing, or anything in this case, because his stories and his efforts setting up the creators of X are the legacy and the fertile creative source from which all future X comics now spring, right? All future X comics are coming from the creative ground that Hickman sampled. Okay, so we are all sort of living in the Hickman X-Men verse, whether he's there writing an ongoing or not. And listen, as disappointed as I'll be by an X line that would continue without any Hickman involvement beyond Inferno, the creators of X is an absolutely unique situation in the history of flippin' Marvel Comics, as I already said, right? This many high-quality creators at the peak of their powers, all contributing to the same area of Marvel. Seriously, run through Marvel history and tell me when that's been the case. That is incredibly unique. So no, clearly X-Men comics don't up and die without the guiding hand of one creative voice, and that is by design. Okay? That's by design. Admittedly, though, I think the argument goes deeper than that, and it's right there in the interview, and that's what has me the most excited about what's next for Marvel Comics. That's right. I'm excited about what's next potentially for Marvel Comics based on this interview, despite my initial tremendous disappointment, despite being very, very bummed out. Okay? Here's why I'm excited, right? Let's look at what he said here. I'm just going to read the quote for those of you who are listening along, maybe not looking. Hickman said this to EW in the interview. Marvel doesn't really pay me just to write ongoing monthly books. There's an expectation for me to write bigger books that have a wider reach than that. In an effort to facilitate both things, we've all spent the last 6 months or so reorienting the line, me creating Inferno to assist with that, and then bringing in some new writers to add to the existing team. That's exciting. And then plan for the next several years of X books. So after Inferno, I'll be leaving to go work on my next big Marvel thing, TM, and starting in January, the X line will rocket forward, starting with a weekly series, cool books, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, let's talk about this. Hickman's third act structure, right? What was that going to be? Well, I talked about it, okay? Phalanx, big galactic intelligences, dominions, and then also the other shoe to drop that I'm guessing will not be dropping in Inferno, Moira's 11th life, okay? Maybe Hickman's third act subsumes the Marvel Universe, okay? Takes it over. It's too big. It's too big to just be an X-Men thing. It takes over the entire Marvel Universe. I've been saying for a while now that a Moira Life 11 reset could impact so much more than X-Men, and maybe the way to integrate that the most successfully is to have Hickman shape certain elements across the entire universe. You know, when I've talked about in the past this idea of the Moira Life reset, or this idea of like an alternate reality where all the books sort of become Moira Life 11, what would that look like? You know, one of the bigger questions there has been like, yeah, but what do you do about the ongoing Avengers title? What do you do about the ongoing Fantastic Four title? And those sorts of things. And I think possibly the answer is you bring them into it. You bring everything into this picture of galactic dominions. Again, like if the Phalanx show up and part of Moira's plan is like, we want to ascend to godhood, that'd be a weird thing to not mention in the pages of like Fantastic Four, right? So I think this stuff, the third act, gets so big and it gets so wild that I think potentially you need more of the Marvel Universe involved. Now, consider too that like all these properties and creative playgrounds that other creators are exploring, those other creators sort of need to be on a similar page in order for that to work. You know, otherwise it just doesn't, it's not going to float, you know? So when you look through Marvel history, the eras that are most disappointing or maligned, especially in the modern era, my repeated observation is that those are the eras where the center of the Marvel Universe is the least defined, okay? I am consistently most into Marvel Comics as a whole when the center, the core, the direction of the universe is held in place by some kind of vision and creative consistency. So in the 60s, you have, by virtue of the newness of everything, the vision of Jack, Steve, and Stan, and their collaborators, right? Everything is so new that the shared universe is at its most knowable in a way that you can never really put back in the bottle, with the exception of something like an Ultimate Universe relaunch. Now, the late 70s through the late 80s are probably the greatest exception to this theory, where events are in their developmental stages. And really the success of the period is defined by auteur performances holding down their own turf, right? So when we look back on that era, you have Frank Miller's Daredevil, Chris Claremont's X-Men, Walt Simonson's Thor, John Byrne's Fantastic Four, Peter David's Hulk, Anna Senti's Daredevil, on it goes, and all the great creator vision specific runs that get shorthanded to overlook the role of the essential artistic collaborators, okay? And I think this is where the idea of Jonathan Hickman's X-Men stems from, when clearly the reality since House and Powers has pretty clearly been that this is a lot more than the vision of, again, the one special voice, you know? Like that has not been true since House and Powers, and I think that's been clear. So when you move into the modern era, and from 2004 to 2010, give or take, you have the Bendis Avengers defining the universe-wide center. You have the Bendis Avengers, flaws and all, warts and all, defining the center of where things are going, driving through events. And somewhere during the close of that, you have Bendis passing the reins to Hickman very purposefully, very intentionally. Remember, Bendis co-writes Secret Warriors with Hickman. He gets him going, who would take a vision through to 2015 Secret Wars. And this core set of where things are going has been missing ever since, okay? It's been missing ever since Secret Wars. 2018's move to CB Cebulski and Marvel Fresh Start, they reset the counter, they reset the clock, and they launched enough really interesting individual series that we've been able to kind of ignore that the center cannot hold. There's not really a center of the Marvel Universe. But as we approach Marvel's fresh end, with Immortal Hulk concluding, the Zdarsky-Chiquetto Daredevil ending or reforming as something else, Cates and Stegman, Venom in the rear view, Ta-Nehisi Coates moving on to Superman, Rainbow Rowell off Runaways, which is getting canceled, Nick Spencer done with Spider-Man, Hickman off X-Men after Inferno, on and on. The absence of core vision is extraordinarily notable, right? When we get through Inferno, not just X-Men, but everything in Marvel has a big open hole. There is no center. There is no vision for what Marvel Comics need to be, okay? In theory, this vision could come from the long-running Jason Aaron Avengers or the long-running Dan Slott Fantastic Four, but the reality is neither of those have the chops, the support, or the respect of the rest of the line, okay? And you can tell when a creator's work is respected by others when other creators want to play in their playground, right? Doesn't seem true for either of those runs. So the absolute smartest thing Marvel could do right now is to recognize this and say to Hickman, a creator who has the reputation as a vision instiller, someone who has done the job from 2008 to 2015 and just did it again with X-Men in truly spectacular fashion, someone who literally gives courses on the art of the relaunch, and you say, here's the contract, here's the money, we want you to be our creative head of Marvel Comics, a boots-on-the-ground sort of player coach, produce actual comics visionary who solidifies the center of the Marvel Universe and where everything is, can, and should be going. So in the short term, that means Hickman isn't writing X-Men Monthly. Why would he be, right? That's kind of a waste of his time. He'll focus on a bigger piece, and we'll talk in a moment about what that could be, and then another bigger piece from there, right? You bounce from giant idea to consolidating and confining what it means to be a part of Marvel Comics in this era, in this moment, okay? And all of it will help the Marvel Universe fit into the X-Men Act 3 narrative, which he could very conceivably make a triumphant return for when the time comes. Makes sense, right? He doesn't say at any point in the interview, I'll never come back to X-Men. He doesn't say, I don't want to touch Act 3. He just says, I'm just not doing it right now. Because all these other creators, they're playing in the Reign of X. And then they're going to be playing in X 2. And I just don't have the time or the capacity necessarily to be writing an ongoing set in that moment. Okay? But could he go and touch other things that then build to an Act 3 where he does in fact return to write that proper X-Men event? I actually think it's likely. Truly. Like, I really think that's going to happen. If you think about, too, one of the driving themes of why Hickman is taking off from X-Men is that the post-House and Powers Act 1 was too successful. Like, one of the themes, and a lot of this is PR, right? A lot of it is spin. But a lot of the idea here is post-House Powers X-Men comics was too successful. It was more successful than anyone expected. Marvel doesn't want to stop printing these X-books in this moment. And the creators filling in the details don't want to give that up, right? Like, that's part of the interview here is Hickman saying, I asked everybody, like, are you ready for me to do Act 2? And everyone writing the Krakoa era, who's now getting probably the best-selling Marvel comics they've ever had, you know, in a lot of cases, sitting there saying no. And also, like, if you think about it earnestly, creatively, it's really fertile ground. There's a lot to play with. There's a lot to explore. It's something I've said in, you know, a lot of conversations on Crack and Krakoa, this idea that we would be soon moving towards Endgame or moving towards even changes in the X-Men line, it felt too soon because Krakoa still feels kind of new, or it did at least. I don't know that it doesn't necessarily anymore. But regardless, it makes a lot of sense that Marvel editorial and businesses would look at that and say, how can we infuse that power everywhere else in our line? And I think the best way to do it is you get Hickman to take that vision onto giant-sized projects, okay? Sort of create what is the vision or the center of the Marvel Universe, and ultimately, when X-Men comics start feeling stale, when the creators start feeling like, hey, I think we've kind of maxed out the capacity of post-Inferno, Schism, post-Civil War X-Men, however exactly that's going to shake out, you know? Because here's the thing. I think Act 1 is the formation of the Krakoa era, okay? Act 1 is the dawn of X. We know it. We've read it. It happened. Act 2, I suspect, with Inferno, will be X-Men Civil War. I'm not going to call it that, but I think it's basically going to be X-Men Civil War. It's going to be all the secrets come out. Moira's secrets come out, and we're going to be now in an era where the X-Men know about Moira. They know about her plans. They know about everything that was evolved and set up in the making of Krakoa, and then the mutants of the world have a choice. They can choose to continue living on Krakoa with that leadership. They can choose to go with Mystique and her new brotherhood of not-so-evil mutants. They'll find their way, right? And we'll get various mutant nation-states spread throughout Earth, and that will be Act 2. And that will last for a good long time, right? There will be a lot to explore there. You also have all of Planet Arakko that can expand to the cosmos as well. There's a lot that can happen. And then Act 3, all the mutants are going to need to come back together because now the Phalanx are here. Because now we're dealing with galactic intelligences, and because mutants were split, and because the plan got broken, because Professor X, Magneto, and Moira kept all their secrets and didn't let everyone in on the idea, now they're threatened greatly. And now we're looking at extermination. That's going to be Act 3, my prediction. Okay? So all of that is what I still think is going to happen. I still think Hickman is very likely to want to come back and do that Act 3, you know, God willing. You know, hopefully we're not looking at like a George R. R. Martin situation where it's like years and years and years of this. I just don't think it would make sense. Okay, so what is Hickman's next big Marvel thing? Getting to Matt Draper's earlier question about I'd like to see him on Doctor Strange. I think the idea of Hickman touching Marvel magic is probably the most popular, most common theory that I've seen. It seems extremely open for interpretation right now, right? I think Marvel's magic, if you sort of talk about it broadly, is definitely in need of some creative vision. I mean, I don't disagree with that at all. You've had creators, again, like a Jason Aaron, do Doctor Strange run and try to put it together. But if you sort of look at the different areas, and again, you have stuff that's going to be happening soon, right? Like Steve Orlando is going to be writing, this Darkhold series, which is going to involve Scarlet Witch and Doctor Doom, at least is the way it's talked about. You got Al Ewing talking about magic today in Guardians of the Galaxy with Dormammu, right? So you've got creators playing with it, but it's like, is it too vague? Is it too disconnected? I think probably it is. But before we talk about like the plausibility of him doing a big magic book, what a lot of people are settling on is like, oh, it'd be cool to see him do a Doctor Strange run. I don't think it's likely. Like, it doesn't make sense to me that Hickman would come out and say, Marvel doesn't pay me to write ongoing monthly books, and then turn around and write an ongoing monthly book based on an individual character. Like, that doesn't make any sense, right? So I think the idea of Hickman sitting down to do a Doctor Strange run, like the way we're conditioned to think about comics, is incredibly unlikely. I think that would be, or at least like, to me, that would be very disappointing, because then it would be like, well, you could just stay with X-Men. Like, you could have stayed with a property I care about more on a personal level, obviously, right? All subjective, instead of going to Doctor Strange, who like historically has like Brian K. Vaughan and Marcos Martin, right? And the early Stan Steve stuff, but whatever. It's besides the point. I think Hickman would do a fine Doctor Strange. Like, that's not really the point. He's actually, I like the New Avengers Annual that focuses on Strange. I think he'd have cool ideas. I mean, I think Hickman is fairly well suited, especially if you read Black Monday Murders, to do really interesting takes on magic and magic systems. That's in play in Black Monday Murders, where it's like magic and financial institutions and the way those overlap. I think there's potential there. I just don't think like an actual Doctor Strange driven run or an actual Doctor Strange focus could or should happen. I'm seeing a lot of like, oh, you could do Captain America, you could do Iron Fist. If he writes a single character ongoing, I'm gonna lose my mind, because he literally said that's not what I'm here for. That's not what I'm doing. Now, something bigger with magic, right? What would you call it? You've got this Darkhold thing going on. I think post Death of Doctor Strange, remember that event that's coming? A search for a Sorcerer Supreme type thing, a la Bendis' New Avengers, but done way, way better. That could be interesting. Like, sort of like if you just called it the Sorcerer Supreme, I don't have a better name than that. Civil Warlocks was something I joked about, but like, there's a version of that could be interesting. Again, I think he has the capacity. I definitely think he has the talent to do that. I just don't really know that makes a heck of a lot of sense. I don't know that it fits his skill set the best. And also, like, I question... So that move, to me, sounds very MCU driven, right? Because we're going to have a Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness movie coming in 2022. So the question here would be, is Marvel rolling out Hickman as an MCU synergy, sort of moneymaker? And that kind of sounds counter to, I think, how I anticipate he likes to function as a creator. Again, without any inside information at all, that to me sounds a little too cash hungry, a little too tie-in-y to what's going on in the MCU. I think, this is a creator who, whether he's said this out loud or not, I feel like he has, doesn't want to be, he's not writing for the MCU, right? He's interested in writing the things that drive the MCU. You can't really do that with a comic series that's coming out at the same time as that franchise, So I don't know that I necessarily buy that. Again, I think like prior to X-Men, prior to these interviews, if you just had Hickman's or Marvel announcing like, hey, Jonathan Hickman's going to come write a Doctor Strange book, it would have been super exciting. Sounds really cool. Now I'm kind of like, that actually sounds disappointing. That actually sounds like a letdown. I think the other idea that would, well, let's go to the idea 2, because it actually connects to everything I just described. The next big Marvel thing. I think the one that makes the most sense to me is him writing something akin to Grant Morrison's Multiversity, but defining the multiverse for Marvel, okay? The multiverse is the biggest thing on everyone's lips because of WandaVision, because of What If, because of Loki, right? Because of all the stuff that's going on in the MCU that's sort of driving this conversation, but it's the biggest thing that Marvel can't really make accessible. It's the biggest thing that is very hard to say to someone like, hey, you like these ideas of the multiverse? here's what you read, or here's how you understand this in Marvel. What do you give them? You give them series of old what ifs that end horribly for every character. like individual issues of what ifs are often interesting. They're rarely good. So something like a Morrison's Multiversity, but Hickman doing it for Marvel's version, I think could be excellent. Something people have talked about, like an Exiles, which is obviously a book that I want rebooted all the time, every moment of my life. Would love a new Exiles in this moment. Again, I'd be surprised if we didn't get, like, in the way that House and Powers are event books, that you can package in a big old hardcover and sell repeatedly for years and years. That's what I think we get. I don't think we get, Hickman's writing Exiles #1. Hickman's writing Doctor Strange #1. I think instead, again, we get one big event-sounding name, and we get a bunch of concepts and ideas, and then that will structure things in the Marvel Universe that go from there. So that's my broad theory about, like, what Hickman might be writing, the next big Marvel thing. I mean, again, if they set up, hey, Jonathan Hickman writing Doctor Strange in 2022, I will eat crow again. My crow servers are making off like bandits, right? Prices are going up. I continue having to pay because I'm constantly wrong talking about the future, as are most. I just admit it. But like, I don't get that. That wouldn't make any sense to me. I don't really see either. Like, I don't know why he'd want to do that. I gotta say, I just don't know. So I like the idea of it being more conceptual. Magic, multiverse, sure. I mean, another possibility that would make a ton of sense is something I've been talking about for years, which is rebooting the Ultimate Universe, doing it with a really specific Marvel vision, or somebody with vision. It would basically take everything I just described about Hickman structuring the Marvel Universe, but giving him a fresh palette to do it, and it would be the Ultimate Universe, right? Take everything I just said, actually start fresh, a Hickman rebooted Ultimate Universe. I mean, yes, that makes a ton of sense. I'll never forget an interview, I think it was on 11 O'Clock Comics, that I listened to years ago, and how bummed Hickman sounded that Ultimates didn't get to go longer. Like, he was really disappointed. He said, like, he was talking about how many ideas he had for that comic, how he's going to do it for years and years and years. Like, I don't think he was done when he finished Ultimates. Based on that interview, it's been years now. Maybe he incorporated all those ideas and other things. I don't know. But like, taking a vision of somebody who really digs comics and really digs the Marvel Universe and saying, here's a new Ultimate Universe, and you now get to be the head, sort of your own pocket Marvel Universe, that'd be cool too. That'd be a cool thing too. That would almost certainly put a nail in the coffin of, the Hickman return to X-Men, if that's what it is. But we'll see. We'll see, right? So it'll be interesting. I'm curious. What do y'all think? What do you think Hickman's going to be on next? What do you think about those theories? Definitely let me know here in the comments. So Matt, to your question, finally rounding it out, I would like Doctor Strange fine. I just hope it's bigger than that. I hope it's something to do with defining Sorcerer Supreme, something to do with defining magic, really on a broader scale that I just wouldn't fully understand. Something much larger than just the individual Stephen Strange, I think could be cool. All right, so the final super chat question that I have here. My biggest fear is once Hickman goes, the status quo returns. I really don't want the mutants to return back to the mansion. I feel like Hickman could have gone for years with the whole failing stuff, etc. Yeah, I mean, I don't want that at all either. We're not going to get that in the short term, I think, for sure. Like, we're not going to get that back to basics, return to the mansion stuff. That's not the mood and the planning that the current office is set up in. I mean, I think Inferno is going to happen. That's going to lead to some transformation. Again, my prediction is sort of a Civil War-esque thing for mutant kind, but post-Krakoa style mutant Civil War. And then, all the creators are going to play in that space. And they're going to play in that space for a while. There's no putting Professor X and the kids back in the mansion. Like, there's no putting that toothpaste back in the tube without a hard reset, or just like a creator totally ignoring what is happening. That stuff's not going to happen. I mean, as far as like various seeds that Hickman has laid out that haven't been touched, I mean, obviously so much of this is going to be clearer post Inferno, because like I'm hopeful that Inferno can knock off a lot of that stuff. Like, I'm hopeful that Inferno can knock out. It's got to be a big Moira story. I think that's number one. I'm hopeful that it can incorporate all the Vulcan stuff that's been left hanging. I talked about how previously. I don't expect it to incorporate all the Phalanx stuff. I don't expect it to incorporate all the galactic intelligence stuff. What about Rasputin and Zorn hanging out in a black hole? Like, is that actually done? That'd be disappointing, right? If we were like Life 9, Secret Escape, black holes. Nope, nothing's happening. That'd be disappointing. So, I don't know. If Hickman doesn't touch on it himself with Inferno, it's not like other creators couldn't. It's not like they couldn't. It just wouldn't be from the same person you knew. And that could be okay. But again, it's that absence of wholehearted confidence based on a creator's resume that makes it there's less certainty that like it's gonna happen, and whether I love it or not, like it's gonna get paid off, so I don't think we're looking at the status quo for a number of years. Like I don't think we're looking at status quo until an Act 3 style big game event happens. Okay, no way. All right, do we have any other core questions here in the chat? I think otherwise that summarizes today's lecture on why Hickman isn't really leaving X-Men comics. Yeah, I don't know. It's a huge sea change. Like definitely, I'm gonna be less into X-Men than I was before. Like I'm gonna be super into Inferno, and I'm gonna be really into all the books that I enjoyed. I'm gonna be into Sword. I'm gonna be into Hellions. I'm gonna be into New Mutants. I'm gonna be into what Leah Williams has going on, Trial Magneto, whatever comes after that. But otherwise, like I'm gonna slow down on the X-Men stuff. Maybe I'll read some books in Marvel Unlimited, like the whole Percyverse right now, X-Force and Wolverine. It's fine, right down the middle. It's fine. It's not exciting me. So is that something I need to be reading weekly? Probably not. Aside from this whole thing where I, talk about them all the time. I don't know. Maybe I won't be able to quit it all. We'll see. But there's, I don't know, like in X-Corp, for example, number 4 came out today. It's probably the series' best issue, but that's totally a book that, after probably 2 issues, purely based on just how much I'm enjoying a thing, I would have been like, I'll come back to that later or I won't at all. But I appreciate that. So, yeah, definitely let me know here in the comments, what's your reaction going to be? What's your change in consumption going to be based on, like, what happened? Like, are you here for Hickman or are you here for X-Men? Because that's actually an interesting conversation that I think, it seems like most fans, when I tweeted about it initially, were ultimately like, I'm here for X-Men. And I think the more I think about it, the more I'm like, I'm here for creators. I'm not here for characters. I'm a big Marvel Comics fan. I like the characters, don't get me wrong. But there's no character in the Marvel Universe that I just read no matter what, right? I'm not like, I just read every issue of Spider-Man regardless of who's writing. That's not how I approach comics. I didn't read X-Men Blue and X-Men Gold beyond checking in sporadically to see if I might enjoy it, and I didn't at all, so I didn't keep up with X-Men in that moment. I'm a fan of reading creators that I enjoy. And Hickman is very high on that list for me. So like, yeah, that made a big difference. I think too, like I've seen people sort of, pitching like, all right, if for whatever reason the current stable of X writers isn't doing it for you, and you're like, okay, who'd be a big enough name to come in and take over that would get you interested again? That's a really hard question. There are not a lot of names that could do that. I don't have any. There's certain names that come to mind, like James Tynion IV is, like absolutely having an incredible moment in comics. I love so much of his stuff, but clearly just left Batman to do all his Substack stuff. That's not happening. W. Maxwell Prince is probably my favorite individual comics writer on Ice Cream Man. No concept of whether he'd be a good X-Men writer. I don't think that would make any sense. I don't know. That's a really difficult question. I mean, Tom Taylor is a big name, but that wouldn't super excite me. Return of Bendis on X-Men? I don't know. I gotta think about this one more. Writers I like a lot. Ed Brubaker, for example. Like, he's already had an X-Men stint. It wasn't that good. Matt Fraction, same. I should be able to think of more comics writers that I really like. Because, Ram V, great writer. Head of X caliber? I don't know. Grant Morrison, they're probably not doing that. It's difficult. Alan Moore's X-Men, I'm here. Absolutely. If Marvel brings in Alan Moore to head up the post Hickman X-Men, sure. Sure. Clearly, I can only think of writers who are peaked decades ago. Actually, that might not be that true for Alan Moore. He's been very, very good for a very long time. But regardless, that is difficult to think of. I'm seeing Peter David here in the chat. Oh goodness no, goodness no. We have different tastes. Scott Snyder, that would be interesting, but no. I've cooled substantially on Scott Snyder with his Justice League. I mean, Al Ewing's the biggest name in the bunch. That's what I said. Like Al Ewing is probably in the best place right now in terms. I'm seeing Donny Cates now, which is not surprising. That would not do it for me. Not in this moment. I've liked his stuff. Tom King. That'd be interesting. That'd be weird. It'd be interesting. That wouldn't totally suck me back in. But no, I think Al Ewing's. I don't know how much Al Ewing wants to be like a head of X. He's already the head of Marvel Cosmic right now. Like he's already doing big things. That'd be interesting. That'd be interesting. Like how much more invested in the world of X-Men does Al Ewing get? Because that's definitely going to drive a lot of the hype and a lot of the I think fervor for this line right now. You know, like there aren't a lot of comics writers who have sort of the Q rating of an Al Ewing right now. With Immortal Hulk being as good as it is, with that actually wrapping with a huge oversized issue 50, like that would be, that's big. I think it's kind of got to be Ewing. I'm seeing Chris Claremont mentioned as a return. That would be hilarious. Hilariously bad idea. Listen, Chris Claremont, a legend. Obviously, so much of what we love about X-Men is from comics that he wrote. But no, the Marvel Universe does not need to recycle creators who, again, peaked decades and decades ago. That is not something I'm into. It's a difficult thing to answer. I think absolutely it is. Who would be like, but I think that's kind of the thing. I think it's maybe one of the lessons here about investing so heavily in a single creator is the X Office has sort of created this new thing where that is not needed and that is not the focus. And the idea of like, oh, we need one creative voice, which, I'm not gonna sit here and pretend that I'm not mentioning all men too. Like that's, that's my bias, I guess, my perspective. But like you don't need that. I think the X Office, it's more of a team thing, and you need a good team to make this X Office tick in the absence of the one auteur and the one vision. If that's the way things are going to go, if it's really going to succeed. So, all right, final question here that I'll answer. We got any thoughts about if Onslaught Revelation had anything to do with the next era of X-Men comics? So, I haven't done a Way of X video yet. I really like this series. Like, Way of X number 5 was really good today. I like what Cy Spurrier's done a lot the last couple issues. Everything that's happening here in this book has me excited for Onslaught Revelation, the big oversized, kind of culmination of all this, and then Cy Spurrier will go on to do some sort of relaunch sequel, is what it sounds like from interviews. I'll be talking to Cy, actually, I think in, in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 days. That'll be here on the Comic Book Herald YouTube channel. If you want to listen to that conversation, definitely subscribe to the channel, and you can hear what I'm going to ask Cy about there. Some of these questions, definitely, get your questions in if you have them. I'll try to put something up on the YouTube in case you do want to get them in. But I mean, will Onslaught Revelation have anything to do with the next era of X comics? I think in some ways yes. I think in some ways no. I mean, I think it's not going to be able to tie in or sort of spill the beans on Inferno as directly, I think, as it might like to. But I think what we saw in issue 5 today is the Onslaught Revelation, kind of the Onslaught Revelation, like the focus on that character in Way of X is extremely important in terms of how we understand Krakoa. Okay, and I think one thing Cy Spurrier has been doing, and it's one thing I've been questioning as you're talking about it, is like he's really leaning into this idea that like Krakoans, mutants, are coming back from resurrection wrong. And I think that's something the fans have been teasing out there, and there's sort of been some debate about whether or not that would be a good storytelling angle. But like Way of X today confirms it, okay? And I won't spoil exactly how, but basically like Onslaught is actually manipulating all of mutant kind right now, and all of Krakoa. And that's pretty significant because it means resurrection is tampered with. All the mutants who were messing around and just kind of like, oh, I can die, who cares, I get resurrected, they came back wrong. They're missing some things. There's sort of an evil in them, an anger in them that wouldn't have been there previously. And it's really a dark staying on the Krakoan experiment. So I think it'd be weird to have that come up, to have a whole oversized thing on the Onslaught Revelation, and then not mention that in Inferno. Like, that seems like the sort of thing that's going to come up, even if it's just in conversation with Professor X, being like, hey, you unleashed this thing that, spoiled Resurrection to the point that now we have hundreds, if not thousands, more mutants on Krakoa who aren't wholly themselves because of Onslaught's influence. I think it's a good question. I think it's definitely going to impact things. So, all right, definitely. Thanks everybody for listening. As always, I think this has been tumultuous 2 days. For those of us, no, it's fine. It's fine. Everything's gonna be all right. There's gonna be good comics. There's gonna be a new Hickman Marvel project. Again, 3 worlds. Decorum ends next week. If you like the creator, cool. There's new comics. X-Men comics are going to continue to be good, or they won't. That's how this goes. Ta-Nehisi Coates on Wolverine. I don't see that happening, but that'd be a book I would pull quickly. So, but seriously, thanks everybody for joining. I appreciate all the comments. I appreciate all the questions. And as always, stay calm. It's gonna be fine. Enjoy the comics.